don't tell anybody. This is actually quite confidential. But I'm at a meeting this morning with the Prime Minister. Yeah. like don't act so surprised. Yeah. So there's about 30 of us, meeting with him. Yeah. No, in person. Yeah. Shh, don't tell anyone. It's hush hush. I have to learn all of my 12 and a half years of living in Canada, all that training to keep me refined and restrained and dignified and not shout. Yes.
Dignified.
No, I'm saying that I have to learn, I have to act with restraint. Yeah, 30 people in the Jewish community. Okay. I'll let you know what happens. That's exactly what I'm trying for. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we established yesterday that according to almost everybody, regardless of the fact that a person wants to do a mitzvah with my property, I do have a right to restrict him from entering my property if he wants to do a mitzvah there. And we said that this is even more powerful than the argument, for, let's say, a guy wanting to use my tefillin or my lulav. We said it for a couple of reasons. Number one, with the mitzvah of Birkas HaIlanos, you're not obligated to say the bracha. You're only obligated if you see the tree. So you want to put yourself in the state of obligation. That's not my responsibility. I can block you from doing that. And answer number two is, I'm just blocking you from entering my property, right? It's the prefatory, it's the precursor to the actual performance of the mitzvah. So I'm not directly opposing your performance of the mitzvah. I'm preventing you from trespassing on my property. That would be the machshir, the enabler to do the mitzvah. Okay, so we've established that. Okay, aval yesh ladun b'nidon didan. But what we do have to sort of clarify is the question that we left off with yesterday. What if the majority of the tenants of the courtyard who have joint ownership in the courtyard, what if the majority say, what's the big deal? Let people from the neighborhood come in, they'll come into our courtyard, they'll make the bracha, and then they'll leave. And this one curmudgeon, this is the guy who says, no, I don't want it. No. Okay. Let's see. So he started off by telling us a Mishnah in Maseches Nedarim yesterday. He says, if, let's say, we gave the example, a guy named Ruvain got into a fight with one of the partners of the courtyard. And so the partner said, this guy cannot get any benefit from me whatsoever. I hereby make a neder. And so he's banned from the courtyard. So that we saw a machlokas in the Mishnah. The Chachamim say that Ruvain cannot enter into that courtyard that's jointly owned by the partners, where one of the partner has made that neder. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says he is allowed to enter the courtyard, because we basically will argue that any place where he's stepping at that given moment is owned by the other partner. Because of HaRashba, and the Rashba writes about that, he says, but the Rashba writes that you can only justify Ruvain entering the courtyard, even with that argument of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, in a situation where the other partner, he's coming in there to help the other partner. Either there has to be a substantive need, because either I need to speak with you or you need to speak with me. And the reason why he has a right to do that is because the other partner who didn't take the neder can say, it's just as much my courtyard as yours, and I need to speak with this guy. So I've invited him to the courtyard. You can't block him. But the Rashba writes that if Reuven just wants to come in for his own benefit, not with having anything to do with either partner, he just wants to be able to come in and admire the scenery, and the other partner says, "Sure, I don't mind," then that's not enough of a reason for him to trespass when the other shutaf has taken a neder that he can't come in. And the argument goes something like this. When we entered into a partnership to jointly own this courtyard, I gave you permission and you gave me permission. I gave you permission to invite people that you would like to have there for your own utility. And you gave me permission to invite and to do with that courtyard as I please. But I didn't give you permission to let others use the courtyard for their needs that have nothing to do with you. In other words, let's say, and it should be true with anything that we share. Let's say you and I share a car and you want to lend out the car to somebody else. You have to ask me permission first. And if I don't want to lend out the car to somebody else, no. If you want to drive the car, it's for your purposes, Mela, that's one thing. But that you should be able to let other people use the car without my consent, that I'm not prepared to do. And it's almost, well, it's not completely analogous, but it's the same thing over here. You and I share a piece of property. It's implicit that we can use it whenever we want for our own needs, but that you should go ahead now and let other people use it for their needs without consulting with me, that we never agreed to. He says, "V'chein kasav harash shamutar lihikanes l'tzorech echad mibnei hachatzer." That the only, and the Rush says the same thing. The only right that I have to invite someone else into the courtyard is if it's for my needs, like I'm making a garden party and I want to invite my guests. But to let another guy let him make a party in the courtyard, where I'm out of town and I go ahead, yeah, sure, you can use my courtyard. The partner has a right to protest. Okay, makes sense, logical. Okay. Because of Hatur dimyesh b'chatzer din chaluka asul echad min hashuk likanis b'letzarcho elim kein hu letzarch echad mehashutfim b'chatzer. And the Torah writes a similar principle as well. Uvebeit Yosef tama al zeh da'afim nichnas letzarch echad min hashutfim mai havi amikol makom hu nehene midrisas haregel v'hiniach b'tzarch iyon v'ayin b'bach sham masha kasav bazeh. The Beit Yosef, who, as we know, is Rav Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, questions this psak from the Torah based on Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He says, I don't understand. At the end of the day, Ruvain is benefiting from a property that is jointly owned by the partner who took a neder against him. Why is it okay? So the Beit Yosef is not happy with it, but nonetheless, we see a whole litany of poskim, of Rishonim, who say that it is okay. V'hatur kasav. The Asher lo likarish bo letzorech atzmo, the Katava Beit Yosef shadat hatur kedat harashba hanal. And he actually, I mean, really what he's doing now is he's going through a whole list of how we trace this halacha from its origin to the Shulchan Aruch. And the Beit Yosef just writes that the Torah is consistent with the Rashba. But according to the Ra'ah, he's more liberal. The Ra'ah feels that if I'm a shutaf in the courtyard, I can let anyone in the world come in without any restriction, even if it's not for my utility. The Siyama Beis Yosef Shadas Arash Kedas Arash Baruchanal. And the Beit Yosef, however, concludes that the Rush and the Rashba are consistent, and it seems like he's siding with them. Mikol makom lahalacha midei sveika lo nafka. However, at the end of the day, we still are left with a suffix. In other words, we still have this machlokus between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Does a neighbor, a person who jointly owns the courtyard, even if he only owns, let's say, a 1/50th portion of the courtyard, does he have a right to say, no, I'm a joint partner and I can bar anyone from the outside from coming into this courtyard? And this would be true even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, according to the Rashba, if it's for the purpose of that outside person and has nothing to do with us. ועל כן אין להיכנס ולברך ברכת האילנות בבניין שאחד השכנים מתנגד שייכנסו לחצר השותפים. And therefore, you know what? If even one neighbor puts up a fuss, you should not enter into that courtyard, because it may be a mitzvah that's got gained through an aveira, because you're trespassing. Yeah. Aval im ha'ilanot nirot mibachutz, yicholim lamod bachutz levarech ve'in tzrichim litol rishut. But if the trees are visible from the outside, from the exterior of the courtyard, that will solve the problem. You don't have to ask permission if I can make a bracha on your tree, right? You can just go over to any tree, even if it's privately owned, and make the birkas ha'ilanos on it, and it's totally fine. Okay. Okay. So that's the psak of Rav Sharaga, that even when a courtyard is jointly owned, that one curmudgeon can stop people from trespassing, because his argument is, when we allowed, let's think about, let's say, the party room at the conservatory, with, one of my favorite places outside of the bayit. Okay. It's not really, but it's just the place that I like talking about because it has so many applications to what we're talking about. So let's say one of the tenants wants to, I don't even know what the rules are as far as the use of the party room, but no tenant has the right to say, let people from the outside come in and we'll have services or we'll do such and such there. You have a right to say that this party room is for the use of the tenants, but you don't have a right to say, to put up a sign outside the conservatory and say, visitors welcome. It's really that, in other words, yes, we all of the tenants have a joint right for utility, but we don't have a joint right to give it away to other people that are not fellow tenants.
That's generally the rule here, but they've sort of extended for the minyanim and Shabbos.
Okay. So Paul and you were speaking at the same time, addressing the same issue.
Right?
So
go ahead.
Shmuel, at the conservatory, you're saying that was generally the rule, but the condo association sort of looks the other way if people want to bring a guest or have other people come in.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. But again, I halachically, if one of the tenants who says, I'm a from Yid, and it's getting too crammed in the conservatory party room, and I don't enjoy it because I'm maybe a germaphobe or whatever it is, I don't want to come into this party room and find 50 people there. So I insist that in the future, only people who are tenants in this in our building, in the two buildings, should be allowed to daven here. A guy who wants to come in has no shaychus, has no connection whatsoever to the conservatory, but happens to live a block away from the conservatory, and he just finds it to be convenient. Right. So this would have a similar thing. And he could say, how can you stop me from coming? It's a mitzvah to daven with a minyan. You're not going to let me come and daven with you. And you know what? The answer is yes. We can stop you. If we feel it's getting out of hand and it's becoming too stuffy for some of our members, right? Yes, halachically, we can stop you. So this is a great practical halachic issue, not just for Birkat HaIlanot in Israel, but also for, let's say, if one curmudgeon, doesn't even have to be curmudgeon. Let's say he just says, like, it's a big bother for me. Like, I don't want to come to that minyan anymore. It's too stuffy, too many people. I'm happy with 20 people there. I don't want people from the neighborhood coming in. Yeah, I think it might make a difference. I think it might make a difference. Sure. Yeah, it might make a difference. I think that there would be a better argument than the Birkat HaIlanot, as we said before. You're not obligated to make a birkas hailanos if you don't see the tree. So even if that's the only tree in the neighborhood, you can still the curmudgeon can still block the an outsider from coming. Okay.
Rabbi, it's like we have a swimming pool in the conservatory here. So there's a rule that outsiders can come in as long as a resident of the building is with them, and it's limited to 2 guests per resident. So there's rules for that too.
Right. So for the swimming pool, right, you can bring a guest, but you have to stay with the guest.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So I can certainly understand, one way to also circumvent it is, let's say one of the tenants who's the non-curmudgeon notices this young man is coming who lives a block away. And he says, you can be my guest. So therefore, if a tenant objects, the other tenant can say, he's my guest, leave him alone, right? But it could get out of hand, right? If, let's say, 20 guys start coming every Shabbos and it becomes an issue, so then then the tenants they would be in the right. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
So that's okay. Otherwise,
Right, but it's also that's for the need of the tenant. And that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. You're perfectly allowed to do that. That's one of the benefits that I, as a tenant, have by living in that building, is if I want to make a social event that I can't fit into my apartment, there's a party room downstairs. That's part of the social contract that every tenant makes. And I have to schedule it and reserve it in advance. And that room is mine during that period of time. But this is worse than that. This is a public offering to a neighbor who has no connections to anyone else in the building. Okay. The next tshuva, we can just probably start it today. B'din zuchus bar metzra. Now, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that word metzra correctly, but that's how we said it in yeshiva. There's first rights of refusal for a neighbor. We've talked about this outside before, that whenever you're selling a house or a property and there's an adjacent neighbor, you have to give first rights of refusal to the neighbor to meet the asking price. Because if he says, I want to buy that adjacent apartment, I'll knock down the wall. And the same thing is true with farmland, by the way, which is the classic case in the Gemara. A guy owns a strip of farmland and he wants to sell it. So he has to offer it first to the neighbor, because it's very much more beneficial to a neighbor to expand his farmland than to sell it to a third party, right? So it's really just it's the basis of it is yosher. It's the upright thing to do, to give away something, or is it you're not losing anything because it doesn't matter whom you sell it to, but you're giving much more benefit to the neighbor than you are to some party that's coming from outside. Okay. Yeah, we're talking about a Jew. Now, does the din of bar mitzvah apply to a non-Jew? I don't believe it does. In other words, but there should be there may be maybe above and beyond the letter of the law to do that which is upright, even with a non-Jew. Yeah, not just for the sake of shalom, but for the sake of being upright. In other words, I can clearly see how this neighbor will benefit much more than a person coming in and take other person taking possession. So just from a midos perspective, it makes sense to do the right thing. Yeah. I mean, unless the guy's my enemy and has made my life miserable for the last 20 years that I've been on that property, then if he's a non-Jew, so then I might be justified in denying him, the laws of bar mitzvah. But it does seem to be that even if this guy was a pain in my, in my side, and he's Jewish, I still have an obligation. and to the point where I believe that he could take me to Beis Din if I refused to sell him the property. And you can certainly imagine a scenario where the neighbor comes over to me and says, I want to buy your apartment. I hear you're moving out. And I say to him, not if you were the last person in the world would I sell you that property, right? Because you've made my life a living hell those last 20 years, right? So who prevails in a case like that? So the bar mitzvah really does prevail, unless there's some counter argument that the guy can make. Okay. Hashachein sheli b'vinyan machar et dirato b'chashay la'almana. So here's the shaila. My neighbor that lives in the same building as me just sold his dira quietly on the QT to a widow. But I wanted to buy it because I could knock down the wall and expand my apartment. Do I have rights? Can I claim my rights that I'm first in line to buy it? And the Nebuch, the poor widow, she's going to be out on the street, or she's not going to be on the street. She'll have to find another place. We have a mitzvah to treat the widow, right? To compassion and all that. So there's a counterbalance here, right? So what are you supposed to do? Okay. So Kasav Moran b'Shulchan Aruch im adam machar sadehu la'acher ubo ha'shachein sheyesh lo sadeh tzmuda lesadeh shenimkera v'rotzeh liknot ota. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if a person, here the classic example is, like I said, is farmland. A person sold his field to a third party, and his neighbor comes along and that has the adjacent farm property, and he wants to buy it. So tiknu rabotenu sheyachol ben hametzar dahainu ashachein l'shalem lekona shekana tasadeh tasikum sheshilem lemocher avura ulekachta mimenu. The rabbis gave the neighbor the power to force a sale between the new buyer and himself. In other words, even if the seller sold it against the halacha to a third party, I may not be able to block the sale because the sale was done already, but the Beis Din can coerce the buyer to sell it to me. Okay, I don't believe there's such a law in secular law. Yeah, right. Kidarshu rabotenu ala pasuk ve'asita hayashar v'hatov b'nei Hashem Elokecha. This is based on the pasuk in the Sefer Devarim that says, "You shall do that which is upright and good in the eyes of the Lord your God." Lamadnu shechafetz Hashem yitbarach sheyasu b'nei adam zeim ze lifnim mishurat adin. And what that basically teaches me is that Hashem wants us to do the right thing, to do right by other people, even if it goes above and beyond the letter of the law of what my requirements are. But clearly, there's so much more benefit that the neighbor will get from buying the property than a third party will get from it, because the third party can buy an apartment anywhere else. But for me, the neighbor, this is the only apartment that I can knock down the wall and expand my apartment. Well, in the case of the Shulchan Aruch, when the sale has already gone through, they don't cancel the sale, but the Beis Din can coerce the buyer to sell the property that he just bought 5 minutes ago and sell it to the neighbor. So we haven't talked about the widow yet. We're just quoting the Shulchan Aruch. Just remember, we're quoting the Shulchan Aruch. It's helpful when you look at the text, you see. We're quoting the Shulchan Aruch. That's the case of the Shulchan Aruch. The din says shel matzranut shayach lo rak b'sadeh elagam b'dira. So this halacha applies not only to farmland, but it also applies to apartments. And how do we know this? So the footnote says, "Va'ayin b'tosus bava mitzia divra maschel ara." I refer you to Tosus and Bava Metzia. Shekatvu de dina de bar mitzvah shayach rak b'sadeh. Tosus is of the opinion that this law of neighbors' first rights of refusal only applies to farmland. She'im yechaber et shtei hasadot, az yachol lachrosh et shteihem b'telem echad v'lachein shayach bazeh v'asita yashar v'hatov. And the argument why it's limited to farmland is for very, very practical reasons. By doubling the size of the farming area, I can move my plow down a straight line from my property over to what was previously your property. And it's so much more convenient than having to, let's say, own one property on the north and one property on the south and have your property in the middle, right? So the fact that I don't have that problem anymore means like it's huge. It's like a huge alleviation for the farmer. Aval bidira lo shaykh dina de bar metzra, v'chein katav rabbeinu batam b'tshuva ad kan devar. But it doesn't apply to an apartment. That's what Tosfos maintains. Omnam lahalacha kaimalan kerov haposkim shecholkim el rabbeinu tam. But halachically, we paskin like the majority who disagree with Rabbeinu Tam. Usviralahu dedina de bar metzra shaykh gam bebatim, and they opine that it applies even with houses. Ayin b'shulchan aruch v'ramo v'shach sham kosav shekein ikar bein l'sarif das Rabbeinu Tam afilu l'snif ayin sham. And therefore, that's the consensus. Even two houses that are not connected, but they just share adjacent properties, the halacha is, and you can think of course, reasons why that should be. Sometimes a person could say, well, I want to turn two houses into one, which from a zoning perspective, I think is legal. You would be allowed to do that. You could buy a double lot and build a huge house. So why can't you just take two houses and connect them? Is that done ever? Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good argument. You can make that argument, and you can even coerce your neighbor who puts up his house for sale. You've got to sell it to me. And also, it could also be because I want to expand my family, and I want to bring my daughter and son-in-law to live right next door to me, right? Which, may not be so healthy, but we're not going to get into that. But then he says, "V'hinei ayin sham bitaz shekasav diyeshdina de bar metzra bebatim davke kashem smuchim zelazeh." So the Taz says, no, it's only when the houses are literally touching each other that the law of bar metzra applies. Avalim enam smuchim mamish v'yesh hiluch b'nei adam ben hadirot ein bazeh dina de bar metzra. But if they're not mamish adjacent, and the Taz says there is a public thoroughfare between the two houses, the laws of bar metzra do not apply. It sounds like they don't have to literally be touching, according to the Taz, but it still has to be private property that's shared between the two of us, or that there's a property line between the two of us. Then the Taz would agree that the neighbor has to offer it to me first. But if, let's say, you have these walking paths throughout the neighborhood, right? So let's say I'm thinking of Theodore, right? There's a walking path on Theodore that divides right near you, Mordechai, right? So let's say you live on one side of the walking path that leads out to Hilda, and you have a neighbor on the other side of the walking path. The Taz holds there's no law of bar metzra over there because clearly the houses are not connected, and they're not even connectable because there's a public area of that the public has a claim on the use of that walking path, the right of way or easement. Thank you. Okay. The chen kosav hakesef hakodshim sham, and he says the kesef hakodshim. Another commentary says the same thing. V'imkein gam b'nidon didan lichaora nira diyeshdina de bar metzra rak b'shtei dirot. He says, and therefore it would seem the same thing would be true here with the apartment case. It would only apply when there's two apartments, sheyesh lahem kir mishutaf, which have a joint wall. Okay? She'efshar lechaber et hadirot al yedei sheyishbor et hakir beinehem uchadom. That you could break the wall in between the two. I think it would also apply if there's an upstairs and downstairs situation, because you could always build a staircase, right? And that is done sometimes where a tenant will buy an apartment on 2 floors and just connect them with a staircase. But if there's 2 apartment units, even on the same floor, but they're not contiguous, or let's say there's a stairwell that divides between the two apartments, Ein bazeh din matzranut kemo shekasef hataz v'hakesef hakodshim anal. Then there's no law of rights of first refusal. Omnam, Amar lon Rabbeinu Hagahon Shlita, the Mashi ish din matzranut b'shtei dirot b'vinyan achad, eino midin matzran ela midin shutaf. But Rav Sharaga came up with this very innovative idea. And he told this annotator, who's a student of Rav Sharaga, that the fact that you have to offer the adjacent apartment to your neighbor first rights of refusal is not because of the law of Matzran, but rather because of the law of Shutaf, of partnership. The Harei Nifsak b'Shulchan Aruch, the Gam b'Shutaf yesh dina de bar metzra, that a partner also has to be offered first rights of refusal. And where are we partners? We're partners in the common space in the building. So you and I own a partnership on the, let's say, in the lobby. We have a partnership in the hallway. We have a partnership in the stairwell. And because I'm your partner, you also have to offer me first rights of refusal, which would expand this halacha potentially to cases where the apartment is not adjacent. Not so clear about this. This is where we'll pick it up in Mirz Hashem when we continue when I get back. But just keep in mind that that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about this whole concept of bar metzra. Okay? Have a great day, and we'll see you on the other side, Bezrat Hashem. Looking forward. Thank you very
Good
much.
trip, Rabbi.